and begin by saying good day, everyone, and welcome to this latest in EMLYON's series of webinars, which are entitled Sport in the 21st Century. My name is Simon Chadwick. I am Professor of Eurasian Sport at EMLYON Business School, and I'm glad that you can join us today. Thank you to all the attendees, no matter where you are. It's good to have you with us. Just a reminder that as we go through today's webinar, you are welcome to ask questions. Please, can you post them in the sidebar? I will moderate those questions. And I think it's important to stress too that the purpose of not just this webinar, but all of our webinars is to discuss the business and management of sport, and in this particular case, the business and management of football. So whilst everybody, if you do want to talk about football scores, that's okay. You want to talk about your favorite African players, that's okay. However, that is not the principal purpose of this. I think what we're really keen to do is really to get to the heart of the most important business management and, dare I say, leadership issues in African football. Now, to discuss these matters, I have a group of people together here with us, some of whom I've known for a very long time. I think Gerard, we were both boys when we first met each other a long time ago. And Brian is somebody with whom I've got a very, let's say, special relationship. And I'll not say what that special relationship is, but Brian and I have got a very special relationship. And Cynthia I've known for actually a long time through emails and LinkedIn and Twitter and various other social media platforms. But this is the first time Cynthia and I have really spoken face to face. So thank you to all three of you for being here. If I could begin with just general introductions and ask each of you in turn to just say who you are, if you feel able to tell us where you are. And I know that you've each got very particular approaches to and views of African football. So if you could also say something about your background and what your particular interest in African football is. So if I can start with you, Cynthia, and tell us who you are, where you are, and anything else that you think is relevant to our webinar.
All right. Hello, everybody. Simon, thank you so much for inviting me for this webinar. And it's a great honor to finally meet you face to face. And thank you to EMLYON for providing this platform for us to be able to speak about our beautiful continent, Africa. Everybody, my name is Cynthia Mumbo. I run a sports consultancy, Sports Connect Africa. I'm very passionate about our continent and finding homegrown solutions to our sports problems. So we're a consultancy, and what we do is really just figure out commercial solutions to sports problems. I also have a bit of a background in basketball, and when I say a bit, that's where I started and learned the ropes of sports and sports business. I've just been slightly defeated in my first attempt to run for president for the Kenya Basketball Federation. So I'm back in sports business. I'm back in what I do every day, which is sports consultancy work for Sports Connect Africa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia.
Oh, and I'm in Nairobi.
Oh, sorry, okay. So you're in Nairobi. Okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Cynthia. Gerard?
Gerard, you're on mute.
Gerard. Okay, the phrase of the 21st century, you're on mute, Gerard.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'm Gerard Akindes. I'm currently based in Qatar. I'm originally from Benin, in West Africa, the small neighbor of the big Nigeria. My sports, the one I play really, it's basketball. As I've been a big part of my life. And I studied in West Africa, in Benin, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, played basketball in these three countries. Went to Belgium where I studied and coached basketball as well. Went to the US, and studied sport administration. Came to Qatar 6 years ago to work in sport. I work with Simon at the Josu Institute. And now I'm back to education. I'm teaching again. After teaching in Ohio at Ohio University, I'm teaching again here and doing other things and research. And sports in football is not really my technical sport or tactical sport, but it is a sport where I develop. I do most of my research academically, intellectually. It's about football, African football in general. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gerard. And Brian?
Yeah, so my name is Brian Wesaala. I'm from Nairobi. That's where I'm based at the moment, Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the founder of the Football Foundation for Africa. I'm also an amateur football player. I still consider myself one, though my competitive playing days are behind me. But at the height of my career, I played in what is now the National Super League here in Kenya. In terms of professional background, I'm computer science trained, so I have an IT background. I worked in information technology for about 10 years. Then I decided to switch to sports and specifically football. And my main ambition, or rather pull to this, was seeing the amount of potential Africa holds in terms of sports that is unexploited. And that's why I set up the Football Foundation for Africa. And at the foundation, my goal is really to see how we can drive more investment into grassroots football on the continent for a more thriving, more sustainable industry. So thank you very much, Simon, for having me here, and EMLYON Business School for this opportunity. Happy to engage. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for the introductions. Just to say to people who are joining, and we've got a really great audience, so we've got 67 people with us online. Thank you for being here. We were expecting a fourth member of the panel from Ghana. He may still join. So if there appears to be a certain disjointedness to this, in the sense that we've got two people from East Africa and only one from the other side of Africa, then, as I said, my apologies for that. But hopefully Ahmed Nana will join us in due course. The reason for me putting together this webinar really came from one of my students who said to me in a class last year, "What about Africa?" And I said I thought that was a perfectly valid question to ask. So here we are today. But I guess one of the things I should say is obviously today is in many ways a kind of generalization, in the sense that if somebody said to me, "Simon, talk about European football," obviously the way I might talk about football in a Russian context and the way I might talk about football in an Icelandic context would be very, very different. So for those of you who are listening, and I hope you'll enjoy today's webinar, I do acknowledge that we can only do so much in 1 hour, and we can only do so much in terms of a whole continent. But I do trust Cynthia, Gerard, and Brian to give us some insights. Okay, so I'm going to try and say very little because it's much more important that our guests speak. And so if I could turn to you, Cynthia, to begin with, in terms of African football, what do you see currently as being the big issues? When you look out at the landscape and you say, okay, that's a really pressing issue, that's a really big issue, really important issue, what stands out for you, Cynthia?
I have two things. One, governance and accountability is a cracking issue, and we speak about it often, but I'm glad that we're speaking about it. Before, it wasn't spoken about so much. And two is the commercialization of football. So the challenge of when you move, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, not necessarily Southern Africa and northern part of Africa, but sub-Saharan Africa, you have a very big challenge around the commercialization of football. So you have leagues going on. Some of them are on TV, some of them are not, or some of them are broadcast, some of them are not. Some of them have some sort of partnership, some of them are not. But then there's no standard around commercialization, and that comes from a very big gap in capacity and capability. And that can't come about because of the history of, football in Africa or sport in Africa, where historically, football has been a pastime. It's never really been considered part of, the everyday. It's never been really considered as part of business. And so, you can't, we've gotten to a point where we want to be like the rest of the world, but we lack the capacity and the capability to be like the rest of the world when it comes to the game of football and sport in general. But we also can't get there because there's a very big challenge around governance and accountability and structures to be able to, enable us to get everything else working. So from my perspective, I see that as a big challenge, but a good challenge, because we're speaking about it, and I know that, in different quarters, things are being done. To be sitting here with fellow Africans, having this discourse, I think is, great direction. And I know that there's several of these going on. So that's what I see. That's where I see from my perspective, where the challenge comes from.
Could I just pick up on very quickly? You talked about capacity and capability. So there are issues around capacity and capability. Could you explain just a little more what you meant by that?
If you move on the continent, right from, I'd say the north to the south, and try and find out how many marketers do you have who understand sport and the game of football and the fan, and understanding the fan and what, the fan is all about. Do we have that? When it comes to capacity and capability, do we understand sports operations, not just the technical bit, but eventing and managing the eventing aspect? Do we have that? Do we understand what it means? What is it the customer, in this case, the fan, is looking for, or stakeholders are looking for? Do we have enough people to even run our, whether it's our federation leagues or teams? Are our teams managed professionally? Do we have capacity and capability around that? I don't think so. And so we lack that. And because we lack that, it's very difficult to package our games. It's very difficult to be consistent and have some sort of sustainability, because we don't have the requisite professionals to be able to move the game of football forward.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. And Gerard, seen from, I guess, the other side of Africa, a perspective from the other side of Africa, but also you sat in another part of the world as well, looking at Africa. What are you seeing right now? What are some of the issues in football that you think are important?
I think I'll definitively repeat what Cynthia said. The governance, I think more and more that it's probably one of the biggest challenge. And when I say governance, it's not just a direct governance of sport. It is the governance of the society, and how does it relate to sport? How ministry works with sport? Who are they? How do they do it? How the head of state and the minister, all this ecosystem, political ecosystem, how do they relate to sport? And that's one of the biggest challenge that is difficult to overcome, because sport people cannot address that part. And it's a reality that is going to trickle down to how clubs are run, how federations are run, what kind of investment is, when I say investment, it's not just money, it's a mindset. What is invested in developing the sport? And you have to deal with all that before we move down to the commercialization. And the commercialization is not there. There are many challenges. You have the macro challenges, you have macroeconomic challenges, you have microeconomic challenges, but there's also a lack of understanding. What does it take? For those who run the sport, what does it take to have a sport that can generate revenues? I'm not talking about billions of dollars or billions of euros. At the scale of the nation, at the scale of the society, what does it take? And these are challenges, if I'm summarizing, I'll say is more structural a human challenge more than money challenge.
It's interesting that I think some of the things that you said there, Gerard, Cynthia had already alluded to, and you mentioned about investment and around the African mindset. So for those of us who are perhaps non-Africans in the room today, when it comes to football, Gerard, can you tell us what is the African mindset when it comes to football? And again, I know that's a very broad question, but in general, what's the
broad question? I'll talk from, I'm maybe speculating, purely speculating here. I cannot talk for the whole continent. The whole continent is broad, diverse, and rich in colors and smell and everything. But in general, from what I've lived through when I was still on the continent, there's one thing that we have to acknowledge and cherish when we talk about African football. It is they call it a beautiful game. Africans love the beautiful game. They love the dribble. All these elements are part of the culture of the game. And that's something that the culture that has been there and is still there. The other parts that has to be also addressed, it is, that's a beautiful part of it. It is, what does it take to move a sport organization from being an amateur 2 or 3 times practices a week to a more consistent, more structured practice. That's something also that has to be developed. And when we talk about professionalization generally, look at it more from the professionalization of the knowledge more than the professionalization of the economy, where you pay people to do things. That comes with an economic equation. You can make money out of something, you get paid for it. But even if it's not the case, can we raise the level of knowledge of the average person that is involved, who is involved in sports? And that's one of the challenges. Can we raise it? And that mindset has to evolve. We have to understand that everything is about knowledge first. It's not about money, it's about knowledge. And how to bring up this knowledge, that's something to address drastically on the continent.
So we'll perhaps come back to that in due course, Gerard. But if I could move to Brian, and again, from your perspective, Brian, you're living and breathing football every day. It's where you've come from. It's the work that you do. It's what you study and think about. So perhaps from your perspective, what do you see right now as being Africa's big challenges?
Simon, I don't think I will veer away from what Cynthia and Gerard have said. We'll always talk about governance in African football as being a challenge. I think in this case, I will just focus on something maybe they are touching on and point this out as the big challenge we have in the development of football in Africa. And for me, it's a problem of knowledge. It's a problem of education, especially on the managerial science of sport. That's what we are completely lacking on the continent, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, apart from maybe South Africa, who have done quite a bit in this area. But the rest of the continent is really suffering a knowledge gap when it comes to the management science of sport, and football being the most popular sport on the continent. We have not invested enough in developing our own systems of knowledge creation and dissemination when it comes to managing sport. And the little that we have, it's coming from outside and not contextualized so that it works for Africa. So we are ending up trying out solutions that copied from various sporting economies and trying to apply them to the African continent. And that's why we experience failure time and again. we are not progressing because we have not invested in understanding the continent as a whole, and also its diversity. Speaking from an East African or Kenyan perspective, we actually considered the weakest part of the continent when it comes to football. So it's for me, it's also funny that we have 2 East Africans here and 1 West African. But if you look at the management side of it, or success side of it, here in East Africa, we don't have people who are knowledgeable enough to create the sports business ecosystem. So the talent is in abundance, as we'll always say. The youthfulness is there in the continent. The passion is there on the continent, but we don't have the capacity and the capabilities, as Cynthia put out, to manage these, to produce results. And by results, it's a social and economic results, positive results on the continent. So for me, the biggest challenge is in education, in knowledge, and creating the systems to create this knowledge and disseminate it across the continent.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And amazingly, we've been joined by Ahmed. Ahmed, can you hear us? I think he's frozen. Okay, Ahmed, okay, Ahmed, can you hear us? Okay, no, not at the moment. So just before we can move on a little bit, we do have some questions from the floor. I'm going to come to those in just a second. Just to reiterate, obviously to talk about Africa in general is incredibly difficult in this kind of a arena, and hopefully what we're doing today is to prompt and to stimulate a dialogue that people might take elsewhere and conduct in other contexts. So I do realize that sometimes the general nature of the questions and answers that we get may not be specifically relevant to each country in Africa, but I still think it's important for this dialogue. And the other thing that I'm consciously aware of is to not frame this as a critique or as a criticism of Africa. And so if I come back to you now, Cynthia, and ask you this simple question: what does African football do well? Because surely it can't all be negative. There has to be things that the world needs to know about that really African football nations do well. Cynthia.
Thank you. That's a good question. I think one, we know how to bring people together. We know how to drive passion. Football is a religion in Africa. Whether you go to the north, whether you go to the south, you go to the east, you go to the west, Central Africa. There's a way that it doesn't matter where you're from. Football brings people together, right? I feel like I want to say that we do things really well, but I feel like we've set the bar so high for ourselves because we know what it should look like, and it's not what it should look like. So I don't want to pretend and say, oh, we do this excellently and this, that. I think we can do better, in the areas that we've spoken. I'm going to echo Brian in talking about understanding ourselves. The things that we're good at is the entertainment bit, the community bit. If you look at sorry, I speak basketball language once in a while, so forgive me if I say basketball. But if you look at the development of the game, the development of talent, there's so much. I think Brian can, echo this. You have so many people who have set up either, their own community academies. You have football in schools. And if you come to Kenya during football season in high school, you will be absolutely amazed and shocked because you have thousands of kids coming in to play the game in one term, in about 3 months. And you wonder, where do these kids go after this? At the development stage, I think there's a lot being done on the ground. It just doesn't translate to, the national level, and the kids are not necessarily valued beyond the school level. There's so much going on within the communities as well. I mean, and I think this happens across the world, but it's very specific to Africa. If you walk into any slum today, the one spot that you will not miss it, whether it's with the plastic balls or with a ball that was donated by someone or it's a ball that they went and bought, you will never miss football in the street. And we do that really well. The other thing I see that we do interestingly well is locating that talent, finding that talent. Every so often when you see transfers in Europe, you never miss an African name or 2 or 3 or 4 African names, and they come from here. So I see from a development perspective, yes, there's an opportunity to structure it even better, but there's a lot happening around that space.
Mm-hmm. And Gerard, again, what do you see that is good and is positive, and things that African nations are benefiting from and making a contribution to? So positively, what are you doing as a continent?
I'm going to just link to what Cynthia said. I think what we do, for me, the best is to play football. We just play. We play, and kids play everywhere. And it doesn't matter, they just play. I think that's what we do. And when we take time as adults to stand, to stop and look at them play, the spontaneity, the way they organize themselves, spontaneous football, when kids get together, they just organize their games. There's so much, it's so much wealth of the ability to organize themselves, play their game, enjoy it, argue, not fight, and keep playing. And in the mix of it, we will see some girls. That is sometimes surprising, but you see some girls. I think that's what we do the best, is to play. The playing part is still very strong. And now structurally, what we have done the best from the late 80s, early 90s, is to export. Is to export what we have, the best players we have. And we set up academies to do that. And we have done it quite well, in the sense that when we look at what our leagues are and what can come out of a continent that we all assume is not organized enough, we still get exceptional players. Of course, we are not the biggest when we compare the whole continent to Brazil, but we still get some quality players. And what means that the game is there, a little bit of structure allows us to get some well-trained, well-coached players. We do that well. And the last thing I would say, when there's football on the continent, competition on the continent, it's party time. It's celebration time. When you go to an African Cup of Nations, the host country is playing. You go to the stand, it's celebration, it's dancing, it is chant and singing. Yes, we do that. We enjoy football. We enjoy being together through football, even when we are watching games in some of these set up cafe or kiosk, they call them. We enjoy the game, and that part is there. I think we do that quite well.
Okay, I've decided, Gerard, I am a fan. Full stop. I mean, it's actually really interesting to listen to you talk about it in that way, because obviously as a European, particularly an Englishman, football, in many ways, it's a commodity. It's something that people buy and sell, and it's all very instrumental and commercial and economic. It's just kicking a ball and having a great time, and watching people kicking a ball, having a great time. That is, and that's a really compelling, seductive way to talk about African football. It's where you find pure football, by the sound of it. We'll come back to some of those issues in more detail in just a moment. But to add to the answers already, Brian. From your perspective, what does Africa do well?
I'll just add to their perspective as you put it. Yeah, football in Africa is a festival. But I'll go ahead and say that ability to self-organize that you see in African football, especially at the grassroots level, where they don't have enough resources, for me is the biggest strength when it comes to African football. If you go into the communities, the low-income areas, I'm speaking of Kenya here now, you see a lot of self-organization and a lot of beautiful things happening. Be it the community academies that Cynthia has mentioned, the grassroots football tournaments that get bigger capacities in terms of attendees than we have in our elite leagues. Those are individuals coming together and doing amazing things. The challenge is this is not well supported, as I have stated. What we do best has not been supported enough and plugged into what we consider professional or elite, so that we may seem competitive globally. And I'm not saying this is it's a must that we go that way. I think it's high time as Africa, we think what model works for us. Maybe it's that grassroots football that we need to package and sell, because that is what people are consuming here in their thousands. So for me, it's that ability to self-organize that we see around football that is what we are doing well. And it's not something new. It has happened historically to achieve objective, even outside of the football sphere, which we could always talk about in another platform. But the fact that we have been doing it for such a long time means we could have our strengths as a football continent lying there. It's just that we have not done enough to tap into this strength that we have.
Thank you, Brian. Just at this point, Ahmed, can you hear us? I think Ahmed might still be having difficulties joining. If you can hear us, Ahmed, and you get the opportunity to switch your camera on and obviously contribute via the microphone, please, if you could do that. Now, I think obviously there's lots of action taking place on screen. There's also lots of action taking place off screen as well. And I'm just looking at some of the comments in the sidebar. So if I could invite speakers when you're not speaking, if you could take a look at that sidebar, because there are all kinds of questions being asked and observations being made. And so if you do get the chance, by all means, do look at some of those. I'll come back to some of the questions in just a moment. One of the things, or should I say two of the things, somebody has asked me privately, why isn't there somebody from South Africa here today? And I think in some ways, obviously, you would maybe expect somebody from South Africa to be here, because we know about particularly 2010. But I think obviously if you look historically at some of the relationships between, for example, Cape Town Stars and Ajax and the connections there. And somebody has also asked about Nigeria. And I guess—
Hey, Simon, can you hear me?
Hey, Ahmed, we can hear you.
Hello?
Ahmed, we can hear you. Okay, whilst Ahmed gets to grips with that, if I could just come back, we'd also been asked, could we have somebody from Nigeria to speak as well? And I think Nigeria, obviously, economically is a very powerful country. And so I acknowledge South Africa and Nigeria would have been good, but I think we've obviously restricted it to a certain number of speakers. So that's just in response to people who are questioning here. Now, looking through the questions on the sidebar, there seem to be several things that people are talking about. And one of them is governance. And I think all three of you have referred in some way to governance. And so if I could pose the question generally to all three panelists, if there was, let's say, if there was one way of improving or developing the governance of African football, if you're president of CAF, what would be the first thing that you would do to improve governance across African football? You know, perhaps Gerard, if you start.
This is a tough question. Huh? It's a difficult question.
Okay, Brian, so for you first. No, Gerard, Brian. Gerard needs to think. Brian.
No, why me? Because it's a difficult question. I don't think I have the. Anyway, I will.
Is there something that you would like to see?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'll answer the question, because I think the challenges of governance in football that we have in Africa are largely global issues. So there are structural issues in the global governance system of football that cascade into Africa. For example, the lack of development of managerial capacity is something that stems from the top. For a long time, when we talk about development of football in Africa, it's always about football development, which is usually coaches, referees, and minimal investment when it comes to administration and management side of it. So those are things that stem from the top. We all understand the vertical structure that is the governance of football, from FIFA to CAF to the national associations. So if I were to say or to propose something about improving governance of football in Africa, first of all, would be to try and set an agenda for African football. What does Africa want to do with football? Once we have an agenda for African football, then we can start to work on what will it take in terms of governance and the structures we need to put in place to push our agenda. But for as long as the agenda of African football is driven from outside, it will be very difficult as a continent to improve the governance of football in Africa.
Can I just ask you, Brian, as you look at, and I know you work extensively across African football, as you look out, do you see the leaders and the managers out there who potentially can bring about a change in governance?
Yes, in my 3 or so years investing myself in football and seeing who is in the network, I have come across potential or people out deem to have the capacity it takes to drive the agenda. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not in the system, if I can call it that way. They're outside of the system. Whether this is by their choice or the lack of opportunity or the whole system being closed to them, I don't know. But yes, we do have people who could potentially bring the change that we want to see. But this does not get the point that we talked about earlier. We still need to do a lot of work in terms of developing the capacity that we need to build on the management and business side of football in Africa.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Cynthia, you've got your hand raised there, but we need to give Gerard more time to think because he's still thinking.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay.
So Cynthia, you're obviously somebody who aspires to make a contribution to the governance of sport in Africa, a positive contribution. So from your perspective,
I think CAF is doing something. There's the CAF club licensing. I imagine the challenge might be the implementation of the same, but CAF does, and I think maybe a couple of years now, maybe I don't know if it's 2 or 3 years, they have a benchmark for all teams that are to play in the premier leagues of each country. So they do have the CAF club licensing. Well, the enforcement of the same is a different discussion. But I do know that there is a concerted effort to push the governance conversation to the league. So, like I know in Kenya, you cannot be they were given a period of time to set up, whether it's a marketing arm or how to just their management structures of teams. But then again, we go back to that challenge that yes, they're going to set up the structures, and I say this in quotes, but do they have the people Do they have the capacity and the capability to be able to deliver on what it is that, you know, they're trying to set up? So yes, there's that push.
Hello.
Hello.
It's okay. Go on. Continue. Continue, Cynthia.
Yeah. So yes, there's the desire and there's the push. There's definitely the conversation around moving teams to a certain governance standard. But there's the challenge around capacity, capability, and being able to execute this at the local levels. So, you know, just coming back to your question, what would CAF do? CAF is doing something about it. It's just there needs to be resources put behind getting the right people to manage these teams and run these teams.
That's very interesting, because I sometimes think that governance standards are set by European and North American organizations, and it's as though somehow every other part of the world has to comply with these constructs. And so as you were talking there, obviously to think about and to understand, explore African notions of governance and what constitutes good governance, I think it's an interesting one. Anyway, I've kind of stretched that out, Gerard, to give you as much time as possible to contemplate your answer. You know, from your point of view, Gerard, how do you improve governance? How do you develop it in Africa?
I think for me, and you just mentioned it, the standard is from Europe, because Europe dominates global football. For me, it is the essence of CAF. CAF is a confederation to drive African football. And CAF first mission is to organize all the competitions. That's what they do mostly, like FIFA and their competition. And then in addition to that, CAF will try to do some development work. And that mission itself, it's valuable, but at the same time, does it address what Africa needs as a group of nations playing football? And that's the first question for me. They have a license, they have club license now, they have coach licenses. Is it that the solution? For me, that's another question, because that's the model that came from FIFA. We used to get coaching trainings from instructors coming from FIFA. They come for a week or two and they give training. Is it that the solution? How many coaches can be developed through that kind of systems?
Yeah.
These are the questions. I won't give the answer because I'm not a specialist of that, but my thinking here it is CAF may need to assess a little bit more where they emphasize, they have to emphasize their business on the continent. They are trying to enter the development space, but the development requires persistence, strategy, planning. Do they have the capacity themselves to do that in addition to organize the tournament, the continental tournament? That's why I won't say much about CAF because of their position and their capacity. They have a capacity challenge as well. But how do we think about the challenges? That's, for me, the first thing to do. What they are, not addressing the symptoms of these challenges. African football is not performing that well here and there. Yes. Why? We are not professional. Is it just that? Why are we not professional? These are questions. That is a cascade of questions we have to ask to be able to understand where the challenges are. And second, what do we want African football to be? Do we want to win the World Cup? If that's the case, difficult. Do we want to have most African kids play football, enjoy the game in volume? Do we want women to be everywhere playing football on the continent? That's some substantial questions to answer before we start running after some performance on the global stage.
Just to pick up on that, it raises some really interesting issues. I need three brains, I think, because I'm trying to get Ahmed online whilst reading the comments on the chat forum, whilst listening to what you're all saying. So I apologize if I seem as though I'm kind of trying to split my mind in three ways. But I think what you just said there, Gerard, is really interesting, because we have a question in the sidebar from Nancy, and Nancy asks how the three of you feel about the kind of commodification of football that we've had in Europe. Do you see that as being what Africa needs, or do you think not? So what lessons can Africa draw from, good and bad? What lessons can Africa draw from football in Europe, do you think?
I personally don't see it as something we have to be chasing for different reasons. The first reason, it is the commodification of football in Europe is a process, historical process. It just didn't happen overnight. And it kind of answers some societal needs. That's the first challenge. Africa economically can have a different form of commercialized sports, but not the model, the European model, which is a dangerous model for Africa, because the European model today, we have this news of the clubs want to get together and form a super league. It is a model that is going to completely destroy ongoing the capacity of the mass football to have a life, because they are going to completely absorb resources from any system to support a few clubs, and in all these clubs, a few rich players. Is it the model we want in Africa? If that's the model, yes, we can go for it, but is it the model? I'm talking from also a political perspective. It is a replication of the neoliberal model. We talk about the 1% richest in the world. We already have that in sport. Is it the model we want for ourselves? And in Africa, I think we have to think carefully when we talk about commercialization of sport. What model do we want? We can make a living out of sports in Africa if we put our minds and resources together and support people who are in it, but not with all these big gaps that we see in Europe today. When we look at Eastern Europe, economically or sporting wise today, where do they stand in football? Is it the model we want? That's the question. If that's what we want, we work for it. If it's not, we work for something else.
I don't know, Cynthia, Brian, if you want to come.
I think I'll lend my support to Gerard in terms of we need to put our heads together to decide what model we want for Africa's football, so that we have a sustainable ecosystem. And we say this in light of the current situation we find ourselves in with the pandemic, which has really challenged the systems, especially in Europe, in terms of their sustainability and how they will react in future. So we want Africa to go in the same direction. You see, at the onset, I mentioned the challenge with Africa is that we are trying to copy models from Europe and other developed sporting economies, and not really considering our context, our culture, our social cultural, our politics here. We're not putting all that into consideration to decide what role we want football to play in our society. And I will just try to answer a couple of questions I've seen on the side about what football we want to consume. I talked about grassroots football and how thriving it is, especially here in Kenya, where the attendances are very high. So the question for us is, how can we package that and consume it ourselves? You know, the challenge is also, we think, we'll be able to export a football that we ourselves do not consume. For me, that's very difficult to imagine. If we cannot consume the football we are producing, why should we think that the global or the world is going to consume that football and be able to be commercially sustainable? And again, it comes down to another question by Naki Kadwe, especially when you think about governance. Usually, it's a top-down approach from FIFA to CAF, and then it's dictated to the national associations. But at the grassroots level, that's where we really need to institute the structures, because that's where we are growing from. If we want to improve football and if we want to commercialize it, let's go there and improve things at the grassroots, so that what comes out of there is already organized to a great extent. But if we come up with a mechanism like club licensing, it's very well intended, very well documented, but clubs just don't have the resources to implement a majority of what is dictated in this thing. And I know in Kenya, even the clubs at the Premier League level, KPL, where the club licensing came in, a majority were just not able to implement whatever was being proposed. So we really have to think of, how do we want to structure football in Africa? How do we want to consume football in Africa? And then what do we want to sell, and to who do we want to sell our football? We already have enough, I think, consumers within the continent, and we can be able to build internally. With the idea of commodification, I think it's always geared towards the European market. And that's where I see Africa's football only has two interaction points with European football. And that's in the player market and in the media. And in both cases, it works to the advantage of Europe, or rather the disadvantage of Africa. So do we want to continue with the same approach, or do we need to look internally and decide what it is that we want to do with football? I think these are very key questions, like Gerard says, that need us to put our minds together to come up with a way forward.
Can I thank Nancy for your question on commodification? Also to Naki had asked about grassroots and the development of the grassroots. Who else? I've got Timothy, who'd asked about promoting local football and engaging fans with local football as opposed to football elsewhere in the world. But we had a question from Peter around gender equality. I'm wondering, Cynthia, can you start us off with an insight into the nature of gender issues in football, and where there are interesting things happening, or where possibly there are some issues and problems?
Right. I would have loved to speak also about the commodification. So I'll speak about both, if that's okay, because I'm very passionate about the commercial conversation. And I'm going to give something here, because we are asking ourselves questions. I'm just going to give us a little bit of an answer. 65% of Africa's population, we have 1.3 billion, 65-70% are under the age of 35, right? When you look at mobile penetration, it's very high. When you look at digital penetration, it's growing, right? When you look at sports betting, it's $37 billion worth currently. What are they betting on? What are these young guys betting on? They're betting on football. They're betting on the EPL. Where are they watching the EPL? Where are they watching this stuff? They're not watching them on TV. They're now watching them on their phones. So how do we get our African football to a point where our young people can watch them and consume them on our phones or on these platforms, and be able to say that this is something I want to consume? I don't mind, because when you look at the betting conversation, where it's micro transactions, spending half $1 or 20 pence every day, terribly sorry, guys. I didn't realize my phone was on. Maybe Gerard, you can pick that, and then I'll.
Yeah, Okay, Cynthia's point is very valuable. The media part, it's the mobile media basically.
Yeah, sorry guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so when we say where is the solution going to come from, and let us understand ourselves, those are the things that we need to be looking at. Who are we? What are we? Where are our young people? Where is that? They're consuming, they're spending. Now, the English Premier League, as we watch it today, is what, 25, 30 years old? So it's not going to happen overnight. I think that's one of the other things. That's one of the areas where we have a challenge, because we want to be like Europe and everywhere else. And I'm so in agreement with Gerard, we can't be. But when we choose to be what it is that we want to be, it's not going to happen overnight. There has to be some sort of strategic intent. And we have to be very cognizant of that fact, that there has to be some strategic conversation towards moving African football into a commodified kind of conversation. I'll be very in agreement with Brian. If you come into Kibera, and especially during the holiday season, you have football going on in the communities, and you have 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 people coming to watch local football. And on the same day, the Premier League game, the local Premier League is happening, and there's no one in the stadium. So that's a big question. So why is it that guys are watching the local community game, local community tournament, and they're not watching the league? There's those questions to be asked. I'll jump to the gender conversation. The biggest challenge we have is women are not given, and I don't want to say are not given as given, because I don't believe we should be given. I believe women should stand up. We shouldn't be asking for permission to take leadership. We shouldn't be asking for permission to be in those roles. Yes, we work in an environment where it's patriarchal, and you're expected as a woman, to know your place and to sit in this space. But women shouldn't be asking for permission to get into football. The other challenge that we have is in terms of resources. Whenever there's anything around broadcast, whenever there's anything around showing the game, the first priority goes to men, right? And you can never really put your money behind what you can't see. So for us to move women's game forward, we must be able to give the women a platform where they are seen and they are heard. And from that, we'll be able to move the women's game forward.
Now, we in terms of official time, we've got about 5 minutes left. With your permission, we'll roll over just a little. We'll be a little later in finishing than that, because there are two things that have cropped up a couple of times, and I just want you to share your views with the audience on these two things. The first one is on resources. So I've heard the phrase several times today, if we had the resources. So can I ask the question to you all, where are the resources coming from? Or I'll put it another way, where should the resources come from? Should they come from governments? Should they come from governing bodies? Should they come from corporations? Who's going to give the resources? Brian.
That's a very critical question, Simon. And I will say it depends on who is your customer. The money comes from whoever is buying your product. And that's where we have another challenge, because the way we are trying to commercialize, the way they are commodifying football, we find ourselves in a situation where we are competing with foreign leagues in terms of where people put their investment. So a local company would rather support or invest in something to do with the EPL to push their brand than work with the local league. So why is this, and what can we change? Because probably they don't see the value in what we have. So that needs to change. For me, this is, in my view, one of the biggest customers for the football fraternity in Africa should be our governments. They should be given the incentive to invest in football. And that will dictate the business model perhaps we want to build around football. And I'll just refer to a recent report by a leader think tank that says maybe the future of football or the future of the business model in football is in youth development. If we sell football as a platform for youth development, especially in Africa, then our governments will have the incentive to invest. And wherever the governments go, the corporates will also come, because that's how the resources are usually shared. So yeah, it's a big challenge. We'll always complain about resources, but for me, I think we need to be more innovative about our business models for us to attract resources into football. But if we keep competing or being seen to compete with the established brands like the EPLs and the La Ligas in terms of attention, then it would be very difficult for us to attract resources into football. And the numbers, we'll always boast about the numbers in terms of our youth population and all that. But if we don't give people the reason to invest in these young people, we will not get the resources in the sport of football.
I don't know if either Cynthia or Gerard want to add to that, or if I can ask about the second factor. So I said resources is one, but there was another one. Gerard, you switched your microphone on. I'm guessing you want to say something.
No, I just want to confirm what Brian said. There's no sport that developed without government money. Government sport has a social role in the society, and it's a responsibility of government to invest in sport, because the sport is for the people of the nation, and government has to get the resources at the right place. Right now, national teams kind of swallow almost half of budget or most of the budget of the Ministry of Sport. These kind of things have to be reevaluated. Government has to put money, and once that is done properly, then the private sector will have room to build on, and resources will come in, because the sport got some roots and some ground to run with. Yeah, that's it.
So just as a quick aside, Brian is very shortly running a latest in one of his African football business shows on Facebook and other platforms, where he's going to consider diplomacy and nation branding and soft power and how they relate to African football. Let me ask one final question. I've got two. I'll see how long the next question goes before asking the further one. The next question is just the second thing alongside resources is around knowledge. You've all talked about developing knowledge. So what kind of knowledge does African football need? And what is the best, the most effective way of ensuring that those who work in African football actually acquire this knowledge? Cynthia, you have views on this?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about the education conversation, and I feel there's so much potential. One, we have really good universities already existing. We have really good hubs already existing. We have those of us who already have this knowledge and others. So I believe, because we've talked about this resource question, rather than, start from zero, there's always an opportunity to collaborate between different entities, whether it's universities, have exchange programs, and think outside the box from an education platform, create courses that, can be delivered to the different stakeholders in football, so that they gain the knowledge and they amass the knowledge that they require. So, rather than setting up a whole school, then when you talk about business is business. But then, of course, there's the issue of sports business, which is a little bit different. Get an expert who would work with, say, Kenyatta University or United States International University, or whichever university, and have a program that's specific, that can be accessed not just by those in football, but those who would have interest in football. When you look at a lot of the education platforms or the education courses that are existing currently in tertiary education in schools and stuff. What we have is very PE oriented. We don't have much of sports management as sports management or sports entrepreneurship or sports business. So there's a very big opportunity around also empowering the existing institutions to build courses that can deliver on that education. And have, I think there's a big challenge around people getting to school to study. So have an incentive for those who would come to take these courses from football to, you know, come in and then study, and have some sort of incentive for them to get back and deliver this in the sport.
Okay. I'm actually going to start to draw things to a close there at this point. I'm not going to finish just yet. First thing, I'm going to ask the panelists, looking ahead, in both the kind of medium and longer term futures. You know, what should we be looking for in African football? I'll come back to that in a second. But can I draw everybody's attention to the question bar? There are some webinars where nothing happens, and you see tumbleweed blowing through the discussion forum. You know, there's just nothing happens. But this discussion forum has exploded, and I can already see that there are people in the discussion forum who are sharing phone numbers and sharing email addresses and Twitter accounts, and I hope that some of the people who've met each other today, you really are able to connect, and you're able to sustain the engagement that you've established today. So, you know, for me, job done. You know, that was a really important part of this. But people are asking questions like, will the recording be available? Yes, the recording will be available. We'll share it via social media in due course. So that's to answer that question as well. I'm guessing that most of the panelists, and certainly me, will be prepared to kind of answer questions if you were to send questions via social media or by email. So there are other opportunities as well to continue the conversation. But I just want to kind of bring it back to and just really short and sharp, Cynthia, Gerard, Brian, one thing to look out for looking forwards when it comes to African football. One or two sentences. Cynthia, what should we be looking for?
Currently, I'd like everyone to look out for npfl.tv. Nigeria has done something a little different, so it'd be interesting to look at, and I'm happy to be working on that particular program, but I hope it's something that can be adopted across the continent.
Do you want to say that again, just for people who didn't catch it?
npfl.tv. You can stream Nigerian football now. Not all games are live, but you know, we've started from basic, and we're hoping to build that forward, and hoping eventually to have some resources to market the game and move it. But yeah, there's I think that's an exciting platform, and I'm hoping that that model can be picked by many more African countries.
Gerard, in a sentence, what should we be looking out for?
What we should be looking for, I'll talk more about, we need to have, to be collective. That's what African football has to think about, evolving collectively as a continent, as brains, as whatever, to think collectively. That's one of the first thing, and to think about people. Football is about people. Knowledge is people. It's not about stadium, about all these things. Think about people quality, solidarity, and collective work. And then we'll have all the resources, because there's plenty of it, to live out African football.
Thank you, Gerard. Brian?
I'm not sure if I have much to add, really. Thank you to you, Simon, and Cynthia and Gerard for the session. For me, I'll say let's set an agenda for Africa. Let's build a football that is African. And let's decide what that's going to look like. And at the heart of whatever you want to do, let's keep the youths of the continent in mind. Those are the people we need to build for.
Thank you, Brian. Can I, at that point, say, Cynthia, Gerard, Brian, really from my perspective, incredible and really informative and inspiring, and as I say, probably a place where football is how football for someone like me probably used to be before the big money moved in. So I found it interesting from that perspective. To the people who attended, for the people who were posting in the question forum, really one of the liveliest, if not the liveliest, webinar I've chaired in amongst this pandemic year of 1 million webinars every week. This has been one of the liveliest audiences I think we've had. And I think from my point of view, what I hope the audience will take away from this is that there is something really exciting and valuable and distinctive happening in African football, and that there are intelligent, thoughtful, well-educated, innovative people who are really keen to move the agenda forward. I want to say one final thanks, and that is to Ahmed in Ghana, who tried several times to join us, and in the end, he's been sending me some comments privately. I'm really sorry, Ahmed, that you couldn't be with us in the way that you wanted to be with us today. We really would have loved to have had your views from Ghana, but hopefully your African compatriots have done you proud, and have talked about the things that you too hopefully would have talked about. So
absolutely, Simon. Absolutely. I'm so sorry. I have been listening to all of you guys. I am more than grateful and proud of my African brothers that have represented the continent and the brand of African football in terms of analyzing the challenges, the opportunities. I want to say thank you guys. It's been an interesting morning with my technology here. You know what, you win some, you lose some. I look forward to really catching up with you guys in the future and doing this again. Please look out for Kente Business Journal. Is a magazine that is coming out really highlighting the challenges of African industries that can be great job creating potentials, right? So we are looking at research information and literally using that information to create content that can be a go-to information to use to create jobs. So Kente Business Journal is coming out in about 2 weeks. I'll make sure Mr. Simon has all the information and share it with everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ahmed, and I'll share that on social media when you send the details through. So once more, thank you to everybody, to the speakers, to the audience, to the EMLYON people who've recorded this. The webinar will be available on YouTube, probably towards the end of this week or maybe next week. Otherwise, can I wish you well, stay safe, stay healthy, take care of yourself and your loved ones, and keep watching Africa. There are interesting things happening there. So thank you everyone.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank
you,
you.
Thank you, Brian. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brian. Bye.
Thank you, Cynthia, Brian, Ahmed. Bye-bye.